Two congressional candidates, two debates, what we learned when Democrat Rob Mellon and Republican Darren LaHood squared off. Plus, while the state is still without a budget, some lawmakers are showing up to work, others absent. How that's impacting progress. And a wild week on Wall Street, what it means for your wallet.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. We're less than 2 weeks from Election Day in the special race for the state's 18th congressional district seat. Democrat Rob Mellon and Republican Darren LaHood met twice last week to debate the biggest issues impacting voters in Central Illinois.
Mr. LaHood and his money, they're a Goliath. And I can tell you, the only way David wins this one is if we get out and vote.
Democrat Rob Mellon played the role of underdog Wednesday night as he went one-on-one with State Senator Darren LaHood. The Republican has outraised his Democratic opponent by more than $1 million.
Most of my donations came in small donations, but I'm proud of that support.
The conversation quickly moved past money in politics and onto abortion.
Whether it's the issue of life, I'm a strong supporter of life. Proud to have the endorsement of the national right to life in this issue.
Mr. LaHood considers himself a staunch pro-life advocate. You know, as a member of the state Senate, he's voted against education and feeding children. He's voted against expanding health care to low-income families.
With a budget battle looming in Washington, the candidates were asked whether they would shut down the government to defund Planned Parenthood.
Whenever you think about a government shutdown, it should be at the very last resort. So I don't think we should get in the habit of shutting down the government.
I cannot think of a single circumstance where the Congress shouldn't be doing their job. And if they shut down the government, they are foregoing their most basic responsibility.
The two also tackled the Iran nuclear deal.
I am not willing to say that I would accept the Iranian deal today. You know, I need a lot more information.
This regime for 20 years has not complied with any rule put down by the United Nations, by the EU, or the United States. Nothing has been complied with. So now we're going to sign a deal that says, okay, we know you haven't followed any rule, done anything, but we're going to trust you now. This is not the time to do that.
The general election is September 10th. Early voting is already underway. Still no budget in Springfield as the state closes in on 2 months without a spending plan. The House met Tuesday, leaving major legislation on the table, including veto overrides of bills impacting unions and addiction treatment. Democrats simply didn't have the votes as more than a fifth of lawmakers didn't show up.
This is not political theater. These are real lives, real people that are losing their jobs. They lose their job, they lose their home. They don't have child care. That's a huge issue.
I don't think we're going to see great attendance until there's actually some serious votes going on, or if there's a budget deal.
Large absences are not unusual. 15 or more members have missed 6 of the last 10 sessions. Next week, more members are expected to be in town because the House is scheduled to vote on the overrides on those union and heroin-related bills. Local service agencies are continuing to call on state lawmakers to pass a budget. Children's Home and Aid, along with other child care agencies, hosted a legislative panel to discuss the effects of the budget impasse on kids and families in McLean County. State representatives heard testimony from families that use daycare services. Groups like Children's Home and Aid say if a budget isn't passed soon, many families in the area won't be able to provide for their kids.
The longer this budget impasse goes, time is not our friend. The more difficult it is to keep staff, to keep the same level of service, and not have to make changes that affect families. That's a kind of a day-to-day decision that we're just monitoring really closely.
So far, Children's Home and Aid has eliminated or frozen 37 positions statewide. Many doctors and health systems remain skeptical about the state's medical marijuana law, leading some to simply say no. But for doctors dealing with patients who live with chronic pain, they say it's only a matter of time until their patients ask for a different medicine. Physicians like Craig Bax say he wants to learn more about the drug before providing it to his patients.
I anticipate it's going to come up, and I think I'm going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
In a statement, Southern Illinois University says SIU doctors are not allowed to sign off on medical marijuana certifications at this time due to lack of legal protection given the federal status of non-synthetic medical marijuana. Other hospitals in central Illinois say they are still finalizing policies. Governor Rauner concerned about cost vetoes part of a comprehensive heroin bill. The Republican says he disagrees with the measure that would mandate Medicaid pay for several addiction treatment plans. Democratic State Rep. Lou Lang says he will vote to override the veto.
If you don't cover people who are on Medicaid for these treatments and medications, you're basically saying to more than half of the people who are drug addicted in Illinois, we don't care about you.
Rauner did support other parts of the bill, including an element that requires police and firefighters to administer Narcan during an overdose. We'll be talking more about this measure and marijuana later in the show with our On the Record panel. The governor has also vetoed legislation aimed at fighting a liver disease, saying it's too expensive. The bill would have required doctors to offer hepatitis C screenings. Patients would still have had the option of denying the test. Doctors say the measure could have increased awareness for people to get tested. The CDC says more than 3 million people have the disease, but most do not see symptoms for years.
I just thought it was kind of a wrong-headed bill. Certainly we want to raise awareness of Hep C, but I think putting an unfunded mandate on physicians was not the way to go.
Rauner says mandating doctors to run the test could have exposed them to lawsuits. Business leaders in Bloomington Normal looking at a plan designed to help diversify the local economy. Advisors from Arizona-based IO Incorporated say after losing Mitsubishi, the county has several strong assets, including State Farm, Illinois State University, and its hospitals. Now they say it must find a way to grow locally. Its plan of action highlights building downtown, possibly a hotel, to spur interest and continue to redevelop the city's west side.
Any proactive community is planning for the future, and you can't control what other companies might do, whether they close or move for economic reasons, but what we can do is diversify and continue to grow our economy so that we can weather those storms.
The Chamber of Commerce is rolling out a new website which looks at the strengths and weaknesses of the area. It's also a recruiting tool for a task force to help local government figure out when and how to make changes. Still ahead, what does the week on Wall Street mean for your wallet? Our financial expert breaks down what's happening with the global economy. And it's back to school at Bradley. We're going on the record with the university's interim president. Welcome back. Joining me now, interim president of Bradley University, Dr. Stan Liberty. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Well, now I understand that you are not simply the interim president, you are also teaching on campus. So you're in a multi-role there.
That's true. I was asked about a year ago to start doing some part-time teaching for the Department of Electrical.
After you were retired?
After I was retired, yeah. I came back to Peoria to do the grandparenting thing with my grandson, and he just graduated from Dunlap High School. But I was doing some part-time teaching, and I had committed to teach for the department in this, this fall semester. But then the Board of Trustees contacted me last April and said, we think we're going to have an interim period here and would like to have you serve as interim president. So I said, okay, let's do it, but I want to keep the teaching commitment because the department would have trouble covering this without me.
Yeah. So what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? How do you function as both an instructor and a president?
Well, good calendar management, okay. And obviously, students have to have access. So what I did, I had two sections that were originally scheduled. I combined the sections at 8 o'clock in the morning, and half the students are not too happy about that because I told them I won't say that builds character, but actually they're really punctual and really a bright group of young people. But so 8 o'clock, and then I added 2 recitation sections, and I do have a teaching assistant that can help me with problem solving and the recitations and all that. And I'm also pre-recording a lot of the lectures. I'm using what I call flipped classroom techniques on occasion, so I'll pre-record the lectures. They view those, and then instead of lecturing, what we do is we talk about it and discuss and work problems, that kind of thing. So then I've got calendar. I can't set up standard hours for a student, and sit around and wait for students to come or not come. So what I do is I do it on a to be arranged basis. I tell them, send me an email or contact one of my admin assistants, and we'll give you priority on the calendar. You come to the president's office. So it's kind of neat to go to the president's office to talk about your coursework,
Finally, obviously the university is in a period of transition because you're an interim president. The university is looking to bring in a more permanent president. New classes coming in. Enrollment is changing. So how do you make sure that you're keeping the university on track to be in a position where a new president can come in and just jump on?
Well, that's a really good question. The first thing, my first principle in functioning in an interim position is don't just sit on your hands and mark time, okay? And so I want to make sure I send a signal to the campus that we're not going to just do that. We're going to start taking action on things that we need to do that are tactical and important to the university in this interim period. The thing that we won't do is we won't try to initiate a new strategic plan or set some grand vision. That's to be left to an incoming president. So, but in the interim, there's an awful lot to be done.
All right. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it. Dr. Liberty is the interim president and an instructor at Bradley University. Thank you again. Still ahead, medication and addiction. Our On the Record panel talks about how legislation dealing with drugs could impact Illinois. And we're putting our financial expert on the record about the volatile week on Wall Street and how it impacts your wallet. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Joining me now, Jim Stoll, Senior Vice President with Baird, a global financial services company. So it's been a wild week on Wall Street. Really started that way on Monday, where you see in 10 minutes of trading a 1,000-point drop. But in some ways, it was a market correction that people were anticipating. So what happened exactly?
Well, there were a lot of things that went into that day, the market selling off, but mostly it was the volatility to the downside. The momentum took hold, but we've been over 4 years without a 10% correction. So once the momentum was broken to the downside of that 2,040 level on the S&P 500, it was a cattle call for selling and actually some margin calls as well.
And when we look at Wall Street and the pace at which these shares of different companies are traded, and if you think you're somebody at home who's living on Main Street who can compete in this market, it's almost impossible.
It is almost impossible to the extent that you can't keep up with the computers, but there are certain things that investors can take advantage of, like a limit order, to put in an order at a price below the market in the hopes that in a correction they can get an entry point to a company that they covet.
Because that is one of the benefits of a market correction like this, because when the market takes a dive, share prices go lower. I mean, you saw even major technology companies like Apple and Google losing significant shares or pricing on their shares, but it's still very expensive to try to get in on tech companies like that.
It is, and once you see the momentum to the downside, you know, they always say that the market takes the stairs up, but it takes the elevator down. So that volatility could cause the selling pressure to still be in effect, especially with some of the issues that we have at hand with China, with the Fed still out there and not being resolved.
So how much is the Fed going to play a role coming up now? Because we've heard about an interest rate hike, but they may hold back a little bit time-wise.
They might, you know, the rate hike of 1/4%, possibly 1/2%, is all that's expected. So coming up off of zero is actually a positive for the economy because it shows that the Fed believes on their own our economic growth can be self-sustaining. But if they don't do that and the economy regresses, then they really have no bullets left to try to prime the pump.
All right, well, we're going to have to keep an eye on it. We'll have to have you back and see how this plays out in the future, especially when the Fed comes back in September and makes some decisions.
Absolutely.
All right,
Look
thank you very
forward to it.
much,
Thank
Jim
you.
Stoll. All right, the Vice President considering a run for the White House. Why Joe Biden has reservations, though, about joining the race. And marijuana and heroin. The drugs are in the spotlight in Springfield. Our panel goes on the record about new state laws. Welcome back. Joining the On the Record panel this week from Peoria Public Radio, Alex Rusciano and Brittany Ott. corporate services clinician from the Illinois Institute for Addiction Recovery. Long title there.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk right now a little bit about heroin use, and we know that it's an issue that has become a growing problem, not just in Illinois, but across the country, particularly over the last few years, and it's something you see firsthand.
Absolutely. Currently, if you look at some of the research, it's showing that about 25% of admissions to state-funded facilities is related to heroin. And if you look at that across the boards nationally, we're about double the admission rates for heroin addiction compared to the rest of the country.
And it's a problem that we in the media are reporting on, but it's oftentimes arrests or overdoses, just like Brittany sees.
Absolutely, and that's something that I know that you've had stories on, we've had stories on. When you look at the community itself, it has experienced that, just like many communities across the state, across the country, and really one of the questions is, as you mentioned, not just tackling the short-term problem of this person has an illegal substance, but it's also looking at working with the medical community and how do communities react to long-term fix the problem of addiction and substance abuse. And
Brittany, you see firsthand people come in and your group, or you're trying to treat them, and some look to medications to treat, others abstinence programs. Yours is an abstinence program. Can you talk about why you take that approach versus some of the other options?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, there are a variety of treatment modalities that are out there, some medication assisted and others not. We currently focus on the abstinence-based program because it reduces some of those risk factors that we could see with medication-assisted therapies. And so we work more towards the behavioral components, getting the person into treatment, working on what got them there, and helping to teach them new coping skills for life. So that supports that abstinence-style based lifestyle.
And I should remind our viewers that the reason we're talking about heroin is because there was a bill last week that Governor Rauner issued a mandatory veto for to remove some of the bill language that would have required Medicaid to pay for some of these addiction treatments, looking at it as a cost-saving measure. However, the group Illinois Alcoholism and Drug Dependence Association says that there would actually be a net savings of nearly $60 million on this program. It's something you've heard about, the savings from lawmakers that would come with this bill.
Absolutely, Paul, and that's the question, because it highlights for the state budget woes and this looming state budget issues is cost savings. And you yet again have, and see this across Springfield, is Governor Rauner on the one side saying, the state cannot support this will be a financial burden, this isn't good, we need to try and save money when we can. But then you have lawmakers on the other side, some lawmakers who support that legislation, saying, if we don't do this now, if we don't try and allow for people to be reimbursed or agencies to get money for substance abuse related to heroin, then the long-term costs itself are just going to skyrocket. So yet again, you see this kind of bipartisan difference with what's the best fix here.
And we know that beyond just using heroin, that it's a dangerous drug, but that for, in large part, at least the outside perception is that it's used, taken with a needle. And injectable drugs are dangerous, especially when you have maybe a poor community and people are sharing needles.
Absolutely.
And Illinois does have a needle exchange program, but when it comes to people coming in and seeking treatment, paying for it can be a problem. Can you speak to what you see from the people who come in and who are looking for help, but maybe they are saying, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this?
Sure, absolutely. The financial concerns are very much relevant currently, and that's what this bill was looking at, is trying to provide more resources to individuals struggling with heroin addiction. And the concern is that in most state-funded facilities, the wait list can be a month to 6 weeks and beyond. And that's a concern. When you're wanting to get into treatment, we want to respond as quickly as possible. And so the financial limitations are a concern. If you don't have maybe private pay insurance and you're looking to the state for funding, that wait period could be very detrimental.
And a month to 6 weeks is a really long time if you're dealing with addiction.
Absolutely.
Because you're talking about somebody who's obviously, if they're coming to you to get help, they want to kick the habit.
Yes.
But they're very likely an addict.
Yes. It's a very high-risk behavior, so we want to reduce that window between seeking help and getting treatment.
So what do you see as the next step? I mean, next week, lawmakers are back in Springfield, and they're going to be looking at possibly voting to override some of these vetoes.
That's right, Paul, and that and just a slew of other issues. It kind of underscores, I think, the whole atmosphere, this kind of nebulous atmosphere in Springfield right now, which is that uncertainty. I mean, you have lawmakers regarding the heroin legislation saying that they want to challenge, Rounard striking that out regarding Medicaid funding. So that's really going to be the question, because locally, just from a news perspective, many state agencies and groups that depend on funding, not only for this but for many other resources, say that as summer moves into fall and as the year goes on, they're going to be either drawing into more reserves or running out of funding. So as lawmakers return, that's going to be the big question, is how can different lawmakers come together, work with the governor, and try and craft something that can substantially go forward.
We'll certainly keep an eye on it, and we'll have to have both of you back to talk about what happens next. Again, Brittany Ott and Alex Rusciano, thank you very much for joining us. Still ahead, Joe Biden taking a close look at 2016, the surest sign he's strongly considering a bid for the White House. Plus, the federal prosecutor working the Dennis Hastert trial has a link to Hollywood, a television series to which she is tied. Vice President Joe Biden is calling top Democratic fundraisers to meet him at his home to talk 2016. The Washington Post reports the meeting will take place after Labor Day. It will include people who raised money for the 2008 and 2012 Obama-Biden campaigns. It was also reported President Obama gave Biden his blessing to run in 2016. Late last week, Biden expressed reservations, however, about a run, citing the emotional toll. One of the lawyers prosecuting Dennis Hastert has ties to the Netflix series Orange is the New Black. Diane MacArthur is one of the U.S. attorneys on the case, according to Politico. MacArthur prosecuted Piper Kerman, whose time behind bars led to a book and TV series of the same name. Hastert has pleaded not guilty to charges of fraud. Finally, our thoughts go out to the entire WDBJ News family. Wednesday morning, reporter Allison Parker and photojournalist Adam Ward were shot and killed on live TV by a former co-worker. A shocking reminder violence is far too prevalent in our communities, businesses, houses of worship, and places we look to for fun. No one should have to live in fear, but many do. How to change that is a question that seems to be raised only in times of tragedy. That time is now. Challenge yourself and those around you to find an answer and be a force for change. That's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can always stay in touch with the show using social media. Connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter. Use the hashtag CIOTR. We will see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.